I should have seen it coming. Looking back now, all the signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs throughout my entire childhood. But when you're living in it, when you're the one constantly overlooked, you convince yourself that things aren't as bad as they seem. You tell yourself that your parents love you equally, that they're just proud of your sister's achievements, that you're being too sensitive. My name is Sarah, and I'm 34 years old. My sister, Jennifer, is 29. From the moment she was born, she was special. At least, that's what her parents always said. She was the baby everyone had been waiting for, the surprise blessing that came 5 years after me. While I was a fussy infant who cried through the night, Jennifer slept peacefully. While I struggled with reading in elementary school, Jennifer picked up chapter books like they were nothing. While I got mostly B's and C's, Jennifer brought home straight A's without even trying. "Your sister is just naturally gifted," my mother would say, usually right after looking at my report card with barely concealed disappointment. "Some people are born brilliant, Sarah. You just have to work with what God gave you." What God gave me, apparently, wasn't much in their eyes. I wasn't ugly, but Jennifer was beautiful. I wasn't stupid, but Jennifer was brilliant. I wasn't untalented, but Jennifer excelled at everything she touched: piano, ballet, soccer, debate team. The walls of our childhood home told the story clearly. Jennifer's certificates and trophies filled 3 display cases, while my few achievements were relegated to a single shelf in the basement. My father owned a successful commercial real estate company, and my mother had inherited money from her family. We were well off, comfortable in a way that meant private schools, nice vacations, and the newest gadgets. But even that abundance was distributed unequally. Jennifer got a new laptop for high school. I got a hand-me-down from our cousin. Jennifer's Sweet 16 was at a country club with 200 guests. My 16th birthday was a dinner at Olive Garden with immediate family. "We're being more practical this time," my mother explained when I asked why my party was so different. "Besides, Jennifer has so many friends, and she's so popular. It wouldn't be right to give her something small." I learned not to ask questions after that. I learned to smile and nod when they gushed about Jennifer's latest accomplishment. I learned to swallow my hurt when they missed my college graduation because it conflicted with Jennifer's tennis tournament. I learned to be the understanding one, the easy one, the one who didn't make waves. I met my husband, Marcus, in college. He was the first person who ever saw me, really saw me, not as Jennifer's less impressive older sister, but as Sarah, whole and worthy on my own. We got married right after graduation in a small ceremony that my parents attended, but barely acknowledged. They'd been busy planning Jennifer's gap year trip to Europe, a once-in-a-lifetime experience that cost them $30,000. Marcus and I built our life together without much help from my family. He worked as a software engineer, and I became a middle school teacher. We bought a small house in a good neighborhood, nothing fancy, but ours. And 4 years ago, we had our son, Ethan. He was perfect, with his father's dark curls and my green eyes, and he became the center of our universe. My parents seemed moderately interested in their first grandchild. They visited occasionally, always making sure to mention they couldn't stay long because Jennifer needed them for something: help apartment hunting, advice on her career, support through a breakup. I told myself it didn't matter. I had Marcus and Ethan. We were enough. Jennifer, meanwhile, had gotten her bachelor's degree in business, followed by an MBA from a prestigious university, all funded entirely by our parents. She worked for a marketing firm in the city, lived in an expensive apartment that Mom and Dad helped pay for, and dated a string of unsuccessful men that my mother would cry over for days. "Jennifer just has such high standards," Mom would sigh. "She's looking for someone who matches her ambition, her intelligence. It's hard for exceptional people to find their equals." I bit my tongue and didn't mention that Marcus had a master's degree and made 6 figures, or that we had a stable, loving marriage while Jennifer couldn't keep a boyfriend for more than 6 months. None of that mattered. Jennifer was still the golden child, and I was still the afterthought. Then, 2 years ago, Jennifer decided to go back to school for a doctorate in business administration. My parents were ecstatic. They threw her an acceptance party that cost more than my entire wedding. They bragged to everyone they knew. They posted about it constantly on social media, their brilliant daughter pursuing her PhD, their pride and joy reaching new heights. I was happy for her, genuinely. Despite everything, Jennifer had never been cruel to me. She was actually kind in her own oblivious way, never seeming to notice the disparity in how we were treated. She'd call me to chat about her problems, send Ethan birthday gifts, and genuinely seemed to care about my life, even if she talked about herself 90% of the time. The issue wasn't Jennifer. It was our parents and their inability to see anyone but her. As her graduation approached last year, the plans got more and more elaborate. It started with mentions of a nice dinner and ballooned into something that would make a royal wedding look modest. My mother called me constantly with updates. The venue, the caterer, the live band, the decorations, the guest list that had swelled to 300 people. Your father and I want to do something really special, Mom gushed during one of these calls. Jennifer has worked so hard, and a doctorate is such an incredible achievement. We want to celebrate her properly, show her how proud we are. You understand, don't you, Sarah? I understood. I understood that Jennifer getting her PhD was worth a spectacular celebration, while my master's degree in education had warranted a congratulations card. I understood that her accomplishments would always matter more than mine. But I smiled into the phone and said, "Of course, Mom. Jennifer deserves it." What I didn't know then was that the party would cost them $120,000. I didn't know that they'd rent out an entire mansion, hire a celebrity caterer, bring in a famous band, create custom decorations that look like something from a magazine, and spare absolutely no expense to make Jennifer's night perfect. I also didn't know that just 3 months after that party, my son would be diagnosed with a rare heart condition, and I would desperately need their help. That's when I would discover exactly how little I mattered to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I need to tell you about the party, about the moment I stood in that mansion watching my parents celebrate my sister and felt the last thread of hope that things might change finally snap. The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock so thick you could barely bend it, with Jennifer's name embossed in gold letters. Join us in celebrating Dr. Jennifer Catherine Morrison on her extraordinary achievement, it read, followed by the date, time, and location of a historic mansion an hour outside the city. Dress code: black tie optional. My mother called the same day the invitation arrived. "Sarah, I need you to help coordinate some things at the party," she said without preamble. "Jennifer is so busy wrapping up her dissertation defense preparations, and I'm overwhelmed with all the details. You're so organized. Can you handle the place cards and the gift table? Not would you be in charge of giving a speech, or we'd love for you to say a few words about your sister. Just manage the gift table." I swallowed the familiar bitterness and agreed. At least Ethan would enjoy the party. He loved any excuse to dress up and eat fancy food. The night of the party arrived in early June. The weather was perfect, warm with a gentle breeze, as if even nature wanted to cooperate with Jennifer's perfect evening. Marcus, Ethan, and I drove to the mansion in our slightly dented Honda Civic, parking between a Tesla and a Mercedes. Already, I felt out of place. The mansion was stunning, a sprawling estate with manicured gardens, a fountain in the circular driveway, and lights strung through every tree. As we walked toward the entrance, I could hear music playing, not a DJ, but an actual live band. Through the windows, I could see chandelier-lit rooms filled with well-dressed people holding champagne flutes. Wow. Ethan breathed, his eyes wide. At 4 years old, this was probably the fanciest thing he'd ever seen. "Is this a palace?" "Something like that, buddy," Marcus said, squeezing my hand. He knew how hard these family events were for me. "You okay?" he whispered. I nodded, plastering on my practiced smile. "Let's get this over with." Inside, the mansion had been transformed into something from a luxury magazine. The entry hall was filled with white roses and gold accents. A string quartet played in one corner, separate from the main band. Apparently, there were multiple musicians for different rooms. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more per bite than my weekly grocery budget. My mother spotted us immediately and rushed over. looking stunning in a beaded navy gown that I knew must have cost thousands. She kissed the air next to my cheek, then bent down to Ethan. "Don't you look handsome?" she cooed, and for a moment, my son got her full attention. Then she straightened up, already scanning the room. "Sarah, the gift table is in the parlor. That's the room to the left through those doors. Make sure you keep everything organized and write down who gave what so Jennifer can send thank you notes. The place cards are already set up in the dining hall, but please just keep an eye on things." "Mom," I started. "How much did all this cost?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Don't worry about that, dear. Your father and I wanted to do this. Jennifer only gets one doctorate after all." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, it's around $120,000, but don't tell anyone. I don't want people thinking we're showing off." My stomach dropped. $120,000. For one party. I thought about her mortgage, about the student loans Marcus and I were still paying off, about how we'd been saving for 2 years to afford a small vacation to Disney World for Ethan. $120,000 could have changed our lives. But it was nothing to them, as long as it was for Jennifer. Wow, I managed. That's really generous. "Only the best for our Dr. Morrison," Mom said proudly, then rushed off to greet some arriving guests. The evening unfolded like a fairy tale, but one where I was a background character. Jennifer arrived fashionably late, wearing a custom white gown that made her look like a princess. Everyone applauded as she entered. My father gave a speech about his brilliant daughter, his voice choked with emotion, talking about how proud he was, how she'd exceeded every expectation, how she was destined for greatness. I stood at the edge of the crowd, holding Ethan's hand, and tried to remember if my father had ever spoken about me with even a fraction of that pride. The dinner was served in a grand hall with tables decorated with more roses and gold candles. I found our assigned seats, not at the main table with Jennifer and my parents, but at a table in the back with some of my parents' business associates who barely acknowledged us. The food was incredible, each course more elaborate than the last, but I could barely taste it. Marcus kept his hand on my knee under the table, a silent anchor. "We can leave early if you want," he offered quietly. I shook my head. "It's fine. I'm fine." But I wasn't being stubborn. I was being healthy. For the first time in my life, I was setting boundaries with people who had spent 34 years showing me I didn't matter as much as my sister. Jennifer continued to be present in our lives, carefully navigating her relationship with me and our parents. She'd visit Ethan, take him to the park, send him books and toys. We had coffee together once a month, and slowly, we built something that resembled a real sisterhood, not one defined by our parents' favoritism. "They ask about you all the time," Jennifer told me one afternoon over lattes. "Mom cries constantly. Dad's been really withdrawn. I think they're finally realizing what they lost." "What they threw away," I corrected. "They didn't lose me. They chose a party over their grandson. They made an active choice." Jennifer nodded slowly. "I've been thinking a lot about that party," she said quietly. "About how excessive it was. How unnecessary. I was so caught up in the moment in being celebrated that I didn't think about what it represented. But now, knowing what happened with Ethan," she shook her head. "I would have paid for his surgery myself, if I'd known. I would have given up every penny they spent on me." "I know," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "And that's why you're still in our lives." Summer came, bringing Ethan's 5th birthday. We threw him a small party at our house with his preschool friends, nothing fancy, just cake and games in the backyard. He was completely healthy now, running around with the other kids, his laughter filling the air. Watching him, I felt overwhelming gratitude that we'd found a way to pay for his surgery, that he was here and thriving. My phone rang during the party. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway, stepping into the quiet of the house. "Sarah? It's Dad." I should have hung up immediately. Instead, I said, "What do you want?" "To talk. To apologize. To try to fix this." His voice was rough, older. "I've been thinking about what happened, about the choices your mother and I made. And I realize we were wrong." "You realize," I repeated flatly. "After 8 months, You realize you were wrong to refuse to help pay for your grandson's life-saving surgery? Yes, he said simply. We were wrong. We got caught up in celebrating Jennifer, in wanting to do something big for her. We didn't think about how it would look to you, how it would feel. We thought you'd understand, that you'd find another way like you always do. We took you for granted, Sarah. We've taken you for granted your whole life. It was the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard my father say. But it didn't change anything. You're right, I said. You did take me for granted. You still are, assuming I'll just forgive you now that you've realized you were wrong. But here's what you don't understand, Dad. I don't need your apology. I don't need your money. I don't need anything from you anymore. We handled it. We paid for Ethan's surgery. He's healthy and happy. And we did it all without you. I know, he said, his voice breaking. And I'm so proud of you for that. But I'm also heartbroken that you had to. You're my daughter, Sarah. You and Marcus and Ethan are my family. I don't want to lose you over this. You didn't lose me over this, I said, watching through the window as Ethan opened presents, his face glowing with joy. You lost me over a lifetime of choices that told me I wasn't as important as Jennifer. The surgery was just the final straw. What can I do? He asked desperately. How can I fix this? I don't know if you can, I answered honestly. And I don't know if I want you to. I spent my whole life trying to earn your love, Dad. Trying to be good enough. And I finally realized I was always good enough. You just couldn't see it. So now I'm done trying. I'm done performing. I'm done being the understanding one who accepts the scraps. There was a long silence. Finally, he said, I understand. But I'm not giving up on you, Sarah. On us. I'll wait as long as it takes. I hung up without responding. Marcus found me a few minutes later, still standing by the window. Your dad, he guessed, and I nodded. He says he's sorry. That he realizes they were wrong. And nothing, I said, turning to face him. I don't forgive them. Maybe I will someday, but not now. Right now, I just want to focus on us, on Ethan, on the family we've built. The family that showed up when it mattered. Marcus pulled me close. I love you, he murmured against my hair. And I'm so proud of you. We went back outside to the party, to our son and his friends, to the simple joy of a birthday celebration that cost maybe $200 and meant everything. This was enough. We were enough. A year passed. Ethan thrived, growing taller and stronger, with no signs of heart problems. His cardiologist was amazed by his recovery. We slowly climbed out of debt, sacrificing and saving, building our life back piece by piece. It was hard, but we were happy. Jennifer got engaged to a genuinely nice man named David, who worked as a teacher like me. Their relationship was different from her previous ones, quieter, more stable. She seemed happier, more grounded. When she called to tell me about the engagement, she said something that surprised me. I told Mom and Dad, I want a small wedding, she said. Just family and close friends. Nothing expensive or extravagant. David and I are paying for it ourselves. Really? I couldn't hide my shock. Really, she confirmed. I've been thinking a lot about priorities, about what matters. And I don't want to start my marriage by letting our parents throw money around to prove something. I want it to be about me and David, not about showing off. I'm proud of you, I told her, meaning it. I learned it from you, she said softly. Watching you handle everything with Ethan, seeing how strong you were even when Mom and Dad weren't there, it changed me, Sarah. Made me see things differently. The wedding invitation arrived in the spring, 2 years after Ethan's surgery. It was for a small ceremony at a local garden, reception to follow. Nothing like the massive production Jennifer's graduation party had been. When I called to RSVP, Jennifer asked, "Will you be my maid of honor?" I was silent for a moment, surprised. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," she said. "You're my sister, and despite everything our parents did to complicate our relationship, you've always been there for me. I want you standing next to me." "Then I'd be honored," I said, tears in my eyes. My parents were at the wedding, of course. They looked older, more subdued. My mother's eyes were red when she saw me, but she didn't approach. My father nodded at me from across the room. They kept their distance, respecting the boundaries I'd set, even though I could feel their longing to reconnect. During the reception, as I was getting Ethan some cake, my mother finally approached. "Sarah," she said quietly, "you look beautiful. And Ethan, he's grown so much." "He has," I agreed neutrally. "I know you don't want to hear this," she continued, her voice trembling. "But I need you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret our decision. Your father and I were wrong. Not just wrong, we were cruel. We prioritized the wrong things, and we lost something precious because of it." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw genuine remorse. But I also saw years of damage that couldn't be undone with an apology. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "And maybe someday we can rebuild something. But it won't be the same as it was. It can't be." "I know," she whispered. "I just hope someday you can forgive us." "Maybe," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. And it doesn't mean going back to how things were, with me accepting less than I deserve." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. Whatever you're willing to give, whenever you're ready, we'll be here." As she walked away, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe the beginning of a possibility. Maybe, with time and genuine change, we could find a way forward. But it would have to be on my terms, not theirs. I watched Jennifer and David dance their first dance, watched their faces glow with love and happiness, and I felt genuinely happy for my sister. Her wedding was beautiful not because of how much money was spent, but because of what it represented. Two people committing to each other, surrounded by people who truly cared. Ethan tugged on my dress. "Mommy, can I have more cake?" I laughed and picked him up, this miracle boy whose life had been worth more than any party, any material thing. "Sure, baby. Let's get you more cake." Marcus joined us, wrapping his arm around my waist. "You okay?" he asked, always attuned to my emotions. "Yeah," I said, looking at my family, my husband, my healthy son, my sister, who was finally becoming someone I could respect. "I really am." The truth was, my parents' rejection had hurt more than anything else in my life. But it had also freed me. It had forced me to build a life that didn't depend on their approval, to find strength I didn't know I had, to create a family based on love and presence rather than obligation. Would I eventually let my parents back into my life in some capacity? Maybe. But only if they truly understood what they'd done and committed to being different. Only if they could show me, through consistent actions over time, that they valued all their children equally. And if they couldn't, then I'd already proven I could live without them. I had a husband who loved me unconditionally, a son who thought I hung the moon, a sister who was learning to be better, and friends who had shown up when it mattered. I didn't need my parents to be complete. I never had. As I watched Ethan demolish his second piece of cake, his laughter ringing out across the garden, I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you their true colors. My parents had shown me theirs when they chose a party over their grandson's life. And in doing so, they'd freed me to create something better, a family not bound by favoritism or conditions, but by genuine love and support. A family where no one was the golden child because everyone was valued equally. A family where a birthday party at home mattered just as much as an extravagant event because it was about the people, not the price tag. That was worth more than any amount of money. And that was something my parents' wealth could never buy. 3 years after Ethan's surgery, my parents and I reached a tentative truce. It wasn't a full reconciliation. That would take years if it happened at all. But it was a beginning. They started showing up in small ways. A check for Ethan's birthday, which I put in a college fund rather than spend, attendance at his school performances, occasional Sunday dinners where conversation was polite but distant. They no longer expected me to just forgive and forget. They no longer made excuses for what they'd done. My father, surprisingly, was the one who put in the most effort. He called once a month just to talk, never pushing for more than I was willing to give. He asked about my work, about Marcus, about our lives, and actually listened to the answers. He started treating me like a person rather than the responsible, low-maintenance daughter who could be ignored. My mother struggled more. She wanted everything to go back to normal immediately, to have her family whole and happy. But she was learning slowly that some things can't be rushed. That trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. Jennifer and I grew closer than we'd ever been. Her marriage to David was happy and stable, and she was working on setting her own boundaries with our parents. She'd finally realized that being the golden child wasn't actually a gift. It had stunted her growth, made her dependent on their approval, prevented her from developing her own identity. "I'm learning who I am without their constant validation," she told me over coffee one morning. "It's harder than I thought it would be, but it's also freeing." "Welcome to the club," I said with a smile. "It gets easier." Ethan, now 8 years old, was a normal, healthy kid who loved dinosaurs, soccer, which his cardiologist had cleared him for, and making his parents laugh. He had no memory of his surgery, no trauma from those scary months. To him, his grandparents were just people who visited sometimes, nice but not particularly important. That was okay with me. He had Marcus's parents, who doted on him constantly and were present for every milestone. He had aunts and uncles from Marcus's side who showed up and cared. He had more than enough love in his life. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I thought about that party, about the ice sculptures and the live band and the custom decorations that cost more than my car, about the champagne that flowed freely and the 5-tier cake and the 300 guests who came to celebrate my sister. And then I thought about our small backyard birthday parties, about Ethan's laughter as he played with his friends, about the homemade cake and the simple decorations. And I knew which memories would matter more in the end. My parents had taught me an important lesson, even if they hadn't meant to, that love isn't measured in dollars spent or grand gestures made. It's measured in showing up when things are hard. It's measured in sacrifice and prioritization. It's measured in choosing the people you love, even when it's inconvenient or expensive or difficult. They'd failed that test when it mattered most. But in failing, they'd given me the chance to pass it. To show my son what real love looked like. To build a family based on presence rather than presence, on support rather than favoritism. Marcus often said that what my parents did was unforgivable. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd never fully forgive them. But I'd also never forget the community that rallied around us, the strangers who donated to our GoFundMe, the friends who showed up with meals and encouragement, Marcus's parents who gave their cruise savings without hesitation. I'd learned who my real family was, and they'd never let me down. As for my parents, they'd have to live with their choice. They'd have to live with knowing that when their grandson needed them most, they chose a party instead. They'd have to live with the distance I'd put between us, the boundaries I'd erected, the trust they'd shattered. Maybe someday that distance would close. Maybe someday I'd be able to look at them without remembering that terrible phone call, without feeling the echo of that rejection. Maybe. But for now, I was content with my small, imperfect, beautiful life. With my husband who'd stood by me through everything. With my healthy son who'd beaten the odds. With my sister who'd learned to be better. And if my parents wanted to be part of that life, they have to earn it. One small gesture at a time. The Yendi fine. I watched my parents toast Jennifer again and again. I watched them laugh and beam and celebrate with an enthusiasm I'd never seen directed at me. I watched Jennifer glow under all that attention and love, and I felt something inside me start to crack. After dinner came the speeches. Jennifer's advisor spoke, her friends spoke, my parents spoke again. Then Jennifer herself stood up, thanking everyone, her voice graceful and confident. She thanked Mom and Dad for their unwavering support, for always believing in her, for making everything possible. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "You've given me everything." The room erupted in applause. My parents were crying. And I realized that Jennifer was right. They had given her everything. Everything and then some. The party continued late into the night. There was dancing, more champagne, a dessert display that included a 5-tier cake with Jennifer's likeness in edible print. At one point, Ethan fell asleep on Marcus's shoulder, exhausted from the excitement. We stayed until nearly midnight, me faithfully managing the gift table as requested, writing down every present and card so Jennifer wouldn't have to. As we finally prepared to leave, my mother caught me at the door. "Thank you for helping tonight, Sarah. You're always so dependable." She kissed my cheek absently, already turning back to the party. "Drive safe." In the car on the way home, Marcus was quiet. "Finally," he said. "That was obscene." "It was nice," I said automatically, trained to defend my family even when they didn't deserve it. "Sarah." He glanced at me in the darkness. "That was $120,000 for a party. Our entire wedding cost $8,000, and they complained it was too expensive." "Jennifer's different," I said, the familiar words coming easily. "She's accomplished more." She's not better than you," Marcus interrupted, his voice firm. "And she's not worth more. What your parents did tonight, that's not normal. That's not okay." I didn't respond because I couldn't. If I opened my mouth, I'd cry, and I'd promise myself I wouldn't cry anymore over my parents' favoritism. I'd made peace with it years ago, or at least I thought I had. But that night, in the back seat of our car with our sleeping son, driving past the illuminated mansion where my sister's party continued without us, I felt something shift. The peace I'd made wasn't peace at all. It was resignation. It was giving up. It was accepting that I would always be less than, always be second, always be the daughter they loved just a little bit less. I still didn't know that in 3 months, I would need them desperately. I didn't know that my son would face a medical crisis that would drain our savings and force me to make an impossible choice. And I didn't know that when I finally gathered the courage to ask my parents for help, for far less than they'd spent on one party, they would say no. But that night, driving home under the stars, some part of me already knew what was coming. Some part of me had always known that when I really needed them, they wouldn't be there. I just didn't want to believe it yet. September arrived with that particular crispness that signals the end of summer, the kind of weather that makes you pull out light jackets and think about pumpkin spice lattes. Ethan had just started pre-K, his little backpack almost as big as he was, and he'd been so excited about making new friends and learning new things. For a few months after Jennifer's party, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I'd pushed down the feelings that night had stirred up, compartmentalized them the way I'd learned to do my entire life. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, everything changed. I got the call from Ethan's school nurse around 2 p.m. "Mrs. Chung, you need to come pick up Ethan. He fainted during outdoor playtime. He's awake now, but we think he should be checked by a doctor." My heart stopped. I was in the middle of teaching a lesson on fractions, but I immediately called for the teacher next door to cover my class. Marcus was in a meeting, so I drove to the school alone, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, telling myself it was probably nothing. Kids faint sometimes. Low blood sugar. Dehydration. Something simple and fixable. But when I saw Ethan in the nurse's office, small and pale on the examination table, fear gripped my chest. He looked so fragile, so unlike my usually energetic, bouncing boy. "Mommy," he said weakly when he saw me, and I gathered him into my arms. We went straight to our pediatrician, Dr. Patel, who had been seeing Ethan since he was born. She examined him thoroughly, listening to his heart for a long time, her expression growing more serious. Finally, she sat back and looked at me with concern. "I'm hearing an irregular heartbeat," she said carefully. "It could be nothing, but given the fainting episode, I want to refer you to a pediatric cardiologist. Better to be safe." The word cardiologist sent ice through my veins. Heart problems. In my 4-year-old son. The appointment with the specialist was scheduled for the following week, the longest week of my life. Ethan seemed fine, playing and laughing like normal, which I told myself was a good sign. Maybe Dr. Patel was just being cautious. Maybe it really was nothing. Marcus and I sat in the cardiologist's office holding hands, watching Ethan play with blocks in the corner, blissfully unaware that his parents were terrified. Dr. Elizabeth Sharma was warm but thorough, running test after test, an EKG, an echocardiogram, blood work. We waited for the results in an examination room decorated with cheerful cartoon animals that seemed to mock our anxiety. When Dr. Sharma returned, her expression was grave. She sat down across from us, her clipboard in her lap, and I knew before she spoke that our lives were about to change. Ethan has a rare congenital heart condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, she said gently. The walls of his heart are thickened, which makes it harder for the heart to pump blood effectively. It's what caused him to faint. His heart couldn't supply enough blood to his brain during physical exertion. The words washed over me like a wave. Congenital heart condition. I couldn't breathe. What does that mean? Marcus asked, his voice tight. What do we do? Dr. Sharma explained that Ethan would need medication to help his heart function better, that he'd need to avoid strenuous physical activity, that we'd need regular monitoring. But the real solution, the one that would prevent future complications and give him the best chance at a normal life, was surgery. There's a procedure called a septal myectomy, she continued. We surgically remove some of the thickened heart tissue. It's complex, but it has a high success rate for children with Ethan's condition. Without it, he's at risk for serious complications, potentially fatal arrhythmias, sudden cardiac arrest. I felt Marcus's hand tighten around mine. How soon? I managed to ask. I'd recommend within the next 6 months, Dr. Sharma said. The sooner the better, before the condition progresses. We left the office with a folder full of information, prescriptions for medications, and a surgery estimate from the hospital's financial office. In the car, while Ethan dozed in his car seat, exhausted from the long appointment, Marcus and I sat in stunned silence. Finally, I opened the folder and found the cost breakdown. The surgery, hospital stay, surgeon fees, anesthesiologist, post-operative care, all together, even with our insurance, we were looking at about $40,000 out of pocket. $40,000. We didn't have $40,000. Marcus and I had always been responsible with money. We had a decent emergency fund, about $15,000 that we'd saved over years. We had some investments, maybe another $10,000 if we liquidated everything. Our house had a little equity, but not much, as we'd only bought it 5 years ago. And we still had student loans, a mortgage, car payments, and all the regular expenses of living. We could take out a loan, Marcus said, his voice hollow. A personal loan, maybe a second mortgage. With what income-to-debt ratio? I asked bitterly. We're already stretched thin. And what if the surgery has complications? What if there are additional costs? We sat there in that parking lot for over an hour, running the numbers every possible way, trying to figure out how to come up with $40,000 for our son's surgery. There was no good answer. We could cobble together maybe $25,000 if we emptied everything and took on some debt. But that still left us $15,000 short. Your parents, Marcus said finally, carefully. They just spent $120,000 on a party. I'd been waiting for him to say it, dreading it. I can't ask them. Sarah, this is Ethan's life. You don't understand what it's like, I said, tears starting to fall. My entire life, I've been second place to Jennifer. Everything she wanted, she got. Everything I needed, I had to beg for. I can't go to them like some charity case. This isn't about pride, Marcus said, his own voice breaking. This is about our son, our little boy who needs surgery. If there's any chance they'd help. He was right. I knew he was right. This wasn't about my hurt feelings or my complicated relationship with my parents. This was about Ethan. And if there was even a small possibility that my parents would help, I had to try. That night, after we put Ethan to bed, I called my mother. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the phone. Sarah, what a surprise, Mom answered cheerfully. Jennifer and I were just talking about her job interview tomorrow. She's applying for a senior director position at... Mom, I interrupted, my voice cracking. I need to talk to you about something important. There was a pause. Oh. Is everything okay? I told her everything. Ethan's diagnosis, the fainting episode, the need for surgery, the cost. I laid it all out, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to sound desperate even though I was. When I finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, my mother said, "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry. That must be very stressful. We need help. I said, forcing the words out. We can come up with most of it, but we're about 15 to 20,000 short. I know you and Dad just spent a lot on Jennifer's party, but this is Ethan's health. He could die without this surgery. Another long pause. Let me talk to your father, Mom said finally. I'll call you back tomorrow. That night, I barely slept. Marcus held me while I cried, while I let myself hope that maybe, finally, my parents would be there for me when I truly needed them. The next evening, my mother called back. I answered on the first ring, my heart pounding. Sarah, your father and I have talked about it, she said, and I could already hear the but coming in her tone. We love Ethan very much, and we're so sorry he's going through this. But we can't help financially. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? We're not made of money, dear, Mom said, as if explaining something to a child. Jennifer's party was very expensive, and we've been helping her with her job search. She needs a new wardrobe for interviews, and we're covering her rent while she looks for better positions. Your father's business has had some slower months. We just don't have $40,000 to spare. I'm not asking for $40,000, I said, my voice rising. I'm asking for 15. And you just spent $120,000 on one party. That's different, Mom said, her tone cooling. That was a planned expense, and it was for a very special occasion. This is, well, it's unexpected. And honestly, Sarah, you and Marcus are both college-educated with good jobs. Surely you can work something out. Take out a loan. Maybe ask Marcus's parents? Marcus's parents were retired and living on Social Security. They'd already offered us the $3,000 they'd been saving for a cruise, which had made me cry. My parents, who were wealthy, who had just thrown a party that cost more than many people's annual salaries, were telling me to figure it out on my own. Mom, I said, and I could hear the desperation in my voice now, the begging I'd promised myself I wouldn't do. This is your grandson. He could die. Doesn't that matter to you? Of course it matters, she said, sounding offended. But you're being dramatic. Doctors always overstate risks to cover themselves. Ethan will be fine. And quite frankly, Sarah, we've always told you that you need to be more financially responsible. This is a learning opportunity. A learning opportunity. My son's life-threatening heart condition was a learning opportunity. I can't believe you, I whispered. After everything. After a lifetime of giving Jennifer everything she ever wanted while I got scraps. After spending more on one party than I'm asking you for to save your grandson's life. I can't believe you. Don't be melodramatic, Mom said sharply. You're upset, and you're not thinking clearly. Jennifer's achievements deserve to be celebrated. That's not the same as an unexpected medical expense that, frankly, you should have been better prepared for. Something inside me broke. Not cracked like at Jennifer's party, but completely shattered. You're right, I said, my voice eerily calm. I should have been prepared. I should have been prepared for you to choose Jennifer over me one more time. I should have been prepared for you to value a party over your grandson's life. My mistake. Sarah. I hung up, and then I blocked both my parents' numbers, something I should have done years ago. Marcus found me on the bathroom floor, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. He held me while I broke, while I finally grieved for the parents I'd never had, while I mourned the relationship that had been a lie my entire life. But we didn't have time for grief. We had a son who needed surgery. So we picked ourselves up, dried our tears, and got to work. We sold Marcus's car and became a one-car family. We took out a personal loan at a terrible interest rate. We set up a GoFundMe, swallowing our pride to ask friends and strangers for help. We did everything we could, and slowly, painfully, we raised the money. We didn't need my parents' help after all. But I would never forget that when I asked for it, when I needed them most, they said no. And I would never forgive them. Ethan's surgery was scheduled for early December, giving us 2 months to raise the remaining funds. Those 2 months were a blur of stress and determination, of discovering who really cared about us and who didn't. Marcus's coworkers held a fundraiser. My fellow teachers organized a silent auction. People I barely knew from our neighborhood donated to the GoFundMe. Marcus's parents gave us their cruise savings without a second thought. Even Jennifer, when she found out what was happening, sent $5,000 with a note that said, "I love Ethan. I'm so sorry. I didn't know Mom and Dad said no." That note made me cry for an hour. Jennifer's check was the reason I didn't completely cut her out of my life, even after I'd blocked our parents. She called me repeatedly, apologizing, saying she had no idea they'd refused to help, that she'd offered to contribute some of what they'd spent on her party, but they'd told her it was handled. I believed her. Jennifer's obliviousness was genuine, not malicious. She'd been raised to believe she deserved everything, but she wasn't cruel. "I wish I'd known about Ethan's diagnosis before," she said during one call, her voice thick with tears. "I would have told them not to spend that money on the party. A party doesn't matter compared to Ethan's life." "You didn't know," I told her, and I meant it. "This isn't your fault." But I could have stopped them. I could have. "Jennifer," I interrupted gently. "They made their choice. They chose a party for you over surgery for their grandson. That's on them, not you." Still, the guilt ate at her. She started calling every few days to check on Ethan, to ask what else she could do. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was comforting my sister about our parents' neglect of my son. But Jennifer and I had always been okay with each other. The problem was never really between us. My parents, meanwhile, tried to reach out through Jennifer, through other relatives, even through an old family friend. I ignored all of it. I had nothing to say to them. Marcus wanted me to confront them, to tell them exactly how much they'd hurt us, but I couldn't see the point. They didn't think they'd done anything wrong. In their minds, Jennifer's party was justified, and our request was unreasonable. No amount of explaining would change that. The surgery date arrived on a cold December morning, snow falling softly outside the hospital windows. Ethan was scared but brave, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur while the nurses prepared him for pre-op. Marcus and I each kissed him, promised him we'd be right there when he woke up, and watched as they wheeled him away. The surgery took 6 hours. 6 hours of pacing the waiting room, of drinking terrible coffee, of holding Marcus's hand until both our palms were sweaty. Jennifer showed up halfway through, having driven 2 hours from the city. She didn't say much, just sat with us, a silent show of support that meant more than I could express. Dr. Sharma finally emerged, still in her scrubs, with a tired but genuine smile. The surgery was successful. We removed the thickened tissue, and his heart function looks much better. He'll need a few days in the hospital and a few months of recovery, but I expect him to live a completely normal life. I sobbed into Marcus's shoulder, relief flooding through me so intensely, I thought I might collapse. Jennifer was crying too, hugging both of us. Our son was going to be okay. The recovery was hard. Ethan was in pain, confused about why he couldn't run and play like normal. There were setbacks, a minor infection that required extra antibiotics, some fluid around his heart that needed monitoring. But slowly, steadily, he healed. By February, he was back at pre-K, with restrictions on physical activity, but otherwise thriving. The financial recovery took longer. We were in debt, paying off loans that would take years to eliminate. But Ethan was alive and healthy, and that was all that mattered. We cut back on everything. No eating out, no new clothes unless absolutely necessary, no vacations. It was tight, sometimes painfully so, but we managed. In March, 5 months after the surgery, my mother showed up at my house unannounced. I was in the kitchen making dinner when the doorbell rang. Marcus answered it, and I heard his surprised "Helen" before I came into the living room. My mother stood in our entryway, looking older than I remembered, holding a Tupperware container. "I brought Ethan some cookies," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "His favorites. Chocolate chip." I stared at her, feeling nothing. The hurt and anger had burned away during those long months, leaving only a kind of tired indifference. "Why are you here?" "I wanted to see my grandson," she said, her voice wavering. "To see how he's doing after his surgery. And to talk to you." "There's nothing to talk about," I said flatly. "You made your priorities clear. Sarah, please." She took a step forward. "I know you're angry, but you have to understand." "I don't have to understand anything," I interrupted. You chose to spend $120,000 on a party while my son needed surgery. You told me to be more financially responsible while you threw away money on decorations and catering. You valued one night of celebrating Jennifer over your grandson's life. There's nothing to understand. You showed me exactly who you are. That's not fair, Mom protested, her composure cracking. We couldn't afford both. We'd already committed to Jennifer's party and your father's business. Stop, Marcus said, his voice cold. Just stop. You could have canceled the party. You could have scaled it down. You could have done 1,000 things differently. You chose not to. And now you want to show up with cookies and pretend everything is fine. Tears were running down my mother's face now. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how much it would hurt you. I thought you'd find another way. You thought it would be easy for me, like it always is, I finished. You thought I'd just handle it like I handle everything else, while you focused on Jennifer. And you were right. I did handle it. I handled it without you. And I'll keep handling everything without you. Sarah, please. You're my daughter. I love you. Those words, which I'd waited my whole life to hear with any real feeling behind them, fell flat. If this is what your love looks like, I said quietly, I don't want it. I walked to the door and opened it. Thank you for the cookies. You can leave them on the table. And then you can leave. She stood there for a long moment, crying silently. Then she set down the container and walked out. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, feeling oddly empty. Marcus came over and hugged me. You okay? Yeah, I said, and I meant it. I really am. Over the following months, both my parents tried to rebuild bridges. My father called from different numbers, leaving voicemails about wanting to work this out. My mother sent letters, cards for Ethan, gifts we donated, without opening. Jennifer reported that they were devastated by our estrangement, that they didn't understand why I was being so stubborn. But I wasn't.